For millennia, the very geography of our planet, its towering mountain ranges, its endless oceans, its suffocating jungles and its blistering deserts, served as an impassable monolithic barrier that ruthlessly crushed anyone who dared to challenge it. The Earth was not designed to be conquered. It was designed to be endured, and perhaps nowhere was this more violently apparent than at the jagged, fog-choked mouth of the San Francisco Bay, a treacherous mile-wide chasm where the relentless fury of the Pacific Ocean violently collides with the continent of North America. For generations, this churning abyss served as a graveyard for the ambitious. Indigenous tribes deeply respected the violent currents and stayed clear of the deepest waters. Early Spanish and British explorers sailed blindly past it, completely terrified and disoriented by the thick, freezing fog that concealed the deadly rocks. Later, railroad barons and ferry tycoons stood on the cliffs, looked down at the freezing, violent vortex of water, and mathematically declared that bridging the gap was a physical impossibility. Nature had drawn a permanent line in the sand, leaving behind only the wrecked hulls of sunken ships and the shattered dreams of businessmen who believed they could outsmart the tides. Logic dictated that humanity should surrender. Logic dictated that the city of San Francisco should remain forever isolated, on the tip of its peninsula, physically choked off from the vast, resource-rich lands to the north. The projected price in human blood, and astronomical amounts of money, required to span that cursed strait, was simply too apocalyptic to entertain. But driven by the supreme, intoxicating arrogance of modern industrialization, and propelled by a desperate economic panic, a group of humans decided they would not take no for an answer. Led by a relentless, obsessive chief engineer named Joseph Strauss, they decided to rip into the bedrock of the ocean floor, defy gravity, and erect an impossible skeleton of iron and steel, exactly where nothing was ever meant to exist. This is the story of how Joseph Strauss and the United States of America declared war on geography itself, poured $35 million into the earth, and built the Golden Gate Bridge, learning the hard way that when you try to conquer nature, nature always strikes back, hard way. To truly understand the sheer madness and the colossal scale of this mega project, we must rewind time far back to the early 1920s. The enemy here was not just a stretch of water, it was an active, breathing monster. The Golden Gate Strait was a terrifying gauntlet. The water plunging between the cliffs reached depths of over 300 feet. Tides surged through the narrow gap at speeds that moved millions of cubic feet of freezing ocean water every single second, creating underwater tornadoes that could rip a man apart. Hurricane-force winds whipped through the channel at over 60 miles per hour, carrying a highly corrosive, freezing salt fog that blinded sailors and rotted metal within days. The geography itself was a weapon, positioned perfectly over the deadly San Andreas fault line, guaranteeing that whatever man built would eventually be shaken to pieces by the earth itself. But they needed to do it. The geopolitical and economic necessity was absolute. San Francisco was rapidly strangling itself as the rest of the country surged into the era of the automobile. San Francisco was the largest American city still entirely dependent on a slow, vulnerable fleet of ferry boats to move its citizens and its cargo. Economic starvation was an absolute guarantee. If they could not break out of their geographic cage and physically connect their city to the northern counties, their empire would wither and die on the vine. They had to destroy the barrier. The answer to defeating this unforgiving force of nature was not just throwing thousands of desperate Depression-era workers at the problem. It required a brutal, unprecedented leap in technological innovation. Strauss, along with brilliant structural engineers like Charles Ellis and Leon Moisseiff, Village, designed a weapon of brute force and beautiful physics. A suspension bridge pushed to an insane, terrifying extreme. They designed a flexible behemoth that could bend up to 27 feet horizontally in high winds without snapping. They utilized massive concrete anchorages, heavy enough to literally hold back the immense tearing pull of gravity itself. The scale of what was being constructed remains incomprehensible. Workers poured enough concrete into the treacherous ocean floor to pave a solid highway stretching straight from the Pacific coast all the way to the Atlantic. They erected two monumental steel towers, rising 746 feet into the freezing sky, structures heavier than entire city skylines, to hold the roadway suspended over the abyss. They did not use solid chains. They spun two main cables, each 3 feet thick, woven together right there in the sky. from 27,572 individual strands of galvanized steel wire. If laid end to end, there was enough steel wire suspended over that water to circle the entire equator of the Earth more than 3 times. It was a declaration of human supremacy, designed to make the raging ocean below look small. When construction explosively began in 1933, the initial triumph was intoxicating. Dynamite shattered the underwater bedrock, sending geysers of ocean water into the sky. The sheer hubris of the project reached its absolute maximum as towering steel legs began to climb out of the churning water. There was a blind, towering optimism that man had finally tamed the strait. But nature always strikes back. The disaster was inevitable. The ocean refused to be conquered easily. Deep-sea divers, encased in heavy canvas and brass helmets, were forced to plunge blindly into the pitch-black freezing depths to blast the rock for the tower foundations. They had only desperate 20-minute windows between the violent tide shifts to work, before the current would literally rip their air hoses away and crush them against the jagged rocks. Thick fog blinded the surface crews, and a runaway cargo ship crashed violently into the massive access trestle and sending millions of dollars of equipment into the abyss. Nature was violently rejecting the intrusion. Joseph Strauss, terrified of a mass casualty event, instituted the first strict hard hat zone in American construction history and spent a fortune hanging a massive canvas safety net under the entire span of the bridge. For a time it worked. 19 men fell from the dizzying heights, hit the net, and survived, forming the legendary Halfway to Hell Club. But in 1937, just months before the colossal structure was completely finished, nature claimed its agonizing blood price. A massive multi-ton wooden scaffolding platform snapped under the immense strain. It plummeted into the safety net, tearing it completely open with a sickening crack. 10 men were dragged down, falling more than 200 feet into the freezing, violent currents below, their bodies crushed by the heavy timber and the sheer impact of the water. In total, 11 men died violently to bend the Golden Gate Strait into submission. The bridge was finally completed, but a terrible blood price was paid. Today, we jump to the modern era. The mega project stands as an iconic, glowing orange marvel of the world. Millions of cars cross it every year, and the civilized world has entirely taken its existence for granted. But the bridge is rapidly aging, and the modern chokehold is tightening. The Pacific Ocean never surrendered. It merely changed its tactics. Every single day, nature is slowly, relentlessly trying to reclaim the space. The microscopic salt in the fog constantly eats away at the steel, attempting to reduce the magnificent towers to a skeleton of rust. The bridge now demands an endless, punishing maintenance cycle. A permanent, full-time army of ironworkers and painters risks their lives every day, suspended hundreds of feet in the air, sandblasting away the corrosion, and applying thousands of gallons of specialized paint, just to keep the structure from rotting and collapsing into the sea. The threat of earthquakes forces the city to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on massive, continuous seismic retrofits bracing the aging steel. Against the inevitable day, the ground violently tears open. Recently, newly installed aerodynamic railings meant to save the bridge from wind fatigue have caused the structure to emit a loud, haunting, monolithic hum during high winds. A ghostly wail that sounds like the massive machine is screaming. Under the eternal pressure of the elements, the bridge now requires a silent, desperate expenditure of billions of dollars over its lifespan, just to prevent it from tearing apart and taking the regional economy down with it. Today, we are left with a profound paradox. To the millions of tourists flashing their cameras, it is merely a beautiful postcard, a superficial triumph of logistics and artistic design. But to the engineers who maintain it, it is a monstrous, heavy scar of iron draped across a violent chasm, kept alive only by a daily, invisible, and incredibly dangerous physical effort. Monumental engineering is never a permanent victory. In its essence, it is a violent and temporary act of defiance against the natural world. Sooner or later, whether through rust, wind, or tectonic fury, the Earth will try to aggressively reclaim what was taken from it. Because sometimes, hidden beneath millions of tons of steel and concrete, there is a quiet, invisible war. A war between our relentless ambition to shape the Earth, the laws of nature trying to tear it down, and the terrible price we pay to stand in the middle.